Years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से
चीफ मिनिस्टर के लिए मेरा एक ही संदेश है कि वो राज धर्म का पालन करें।
हार्डवेयर वालों की सोच क्या होती है, हार्ड वर्क वालों की सोच क्या होती है। अरे ये ना पंजाब की खुशबू।
In the opening scene of Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, a priest, a woodcutter, and a commoner huddle under the ruins of a gate, sheltering from the rain as they recount a murder. This murder is shown from the perspective of each of these individuals, and what you realize is that each version of the crime, told from a different vantage, feels complete, sincere, and yet completely incompatible to each other. Truth here is not singular, but has multiple casting shadows in, like a candle in the dark, contradictory shadows. The film does not solve the crime. Instead, it reveals a deeper terror. The truth, once thought to be solid ground beneath our feet, may be nothing more than unstable theater of our desires, fears, and loyalties. India in the age of Narendra Modi feels eerily Rashomonic. Because why is that whatever comes from the Modi government and his mouth is regarded as the truth by a vast section of Indians, no matter how inconsistent with fact or logic it is. Indeed, take a tour of WhatsApp groups or Twitter feeds discussing anything from the historical demonetization to the Chinese incursions to the coronavirus pandemic, to Donald Trump's relationship with India, with the PM, to the new immigration policies being deployed in US and other countries. And you will find a world where every opinion can be a fact if said by the right person. And so, to make sense of this, I thought we should do a deep dive. A deep dive of why what Modi says is seen as the truth that no one else has ever said, and a truth that cannot be refuted. This more so in the light of some of his recent visits and the videos, which are not new. Similar videos have come out in the past as well, where people on seeing Modi, Indians in the diaspora, seeing Modi, are almost, showing behaviors that people show when they see a god man, probably a prophetic figure in their religion. So we need to start at the beginning. That is by understanding the nature of what is true and how something seems true to someone. So what is true? We realize that truth is true, which is a random sentence to say, but it either through our own senses. So if it is raining outside, we can look outside the window and say that it is raining and that's the truth, or through an arbiter of truth that we trust. So an astrophysicist tells us how the Earth revolves around the Sun, and while we will probably not see this happen, we accept it as a truth. So when it concerns the truth, we can't ascertain by ourselves. We need a neutral arbiter, usually a specialist, to validate it for us. And when it comes to our political reality, the arbiter of truth has been the media. Most of us have accepted journalists as specialists who can tell us what is true and what is not. This tendency is very strong in India. While trust in the media has shrunk globally, the data that I have from 2020 last, it has stayed the same and even increased slightly in this country. And how fair of an arbiter of truth is the trusted Indian media? Aaj Tak is the most watched TV news channel in the country, followed by ABP News, Zee News, India TV, and Republic Bharat. The Hindi daily Dainik Jagran is the most read newspaper. A cursory look at these news outlets show that when they aren't peddling falsehood, they amplify certain truths more than others. Partly this is because of the nature of today's media. See, the transformation of truth into a matter of aesthetics and authority did not happen overnight. India's media ecosystem, once somewhat vibrant and adversarial, has increasingly traded skepticism for sycophancy. The most watched news channels in Hindi do not report so much as perform, mythologizing Modi as a rishi of modern governance, a Karm Yogi who acts while lesser mortals bicker, His words, delivered in a baritone seasoned with poetry and pause, carry the incantatory power of prophecy. The content need not be coherent. Only confidence matters. Remember the lighting of diyas during pandemic? A gesture that promised some sort of unity, but offered no PPE kits, no hospital beds, and certainly no epidemiological logic. It was, in effect, political homeopathy, treating national crises with symbolic sugar pills. Jon Stewart once said, 24-hour news networks are built for one thing, and that is 9/11. There are very few events that would justify being covered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in the absence of urgency, they have to create it. You create urgency through conflict. Just put on any random Indian news channel and see how many breaking newses they do in a day. Certainly there are not these many breaking newses in a day. And as far as conflict is concerned, Modi embodies conflict. But let me pause here and let me clearly say that this symbolic turn isn't uniquely Indian. Across the world, we are witnessing what philosopher Harry Frankfurt once called the age of bullshit. A culture in which statements are made not to be true or false, but to be emotionally resonant and performatively loyal. In such a climate, as Hannah Arendt warned, people do not object to being deceived. They object to the idea that truth should matter at all. The liar, after all, must remember the truth to subvert it. The bullshitter feels no such burden. It isn't surprising then that no one has benefited as much from the Indian media's disregard for its role as the arbiter of truth and popularity of social media as our Prime Minister. When I say Modi enjoys huge support on social media, I say it fully recognizing that it is populated by common citizens like us and that his online popularity signifies his mass appeal in general. But having the majority by your side does not necessarily mean you have the truth by your side as well. So, in the rising tides of ratings-driven news media, retweet-driven social media, and election-driven politician, all demanding validation because they have the numbers on their side, the truth becomes the first casualty. And now, we come to post-truth. To understand how this has come to be, one must first unpack what we mean when we say something feels true, or post-truth. Philosophers from Aristotle to Arendt have cautioned against mistaking persuasion for truth. Plato's allegory of the cave reminds us that what we take as real may merely be the shadows on the wall, shaped by those who control the fire behind us. In Modi's India, the fire is media spectacle, and the shadows are speeches, hashtags, and heroic postures of national strength. And in a world bereft of truth, every word becomes a genius policy, every turn of phrase a masterstroke. Here, stunning claims are made and forgotten in a moment. GPS chips and currency notes, destruction of black money, all of it. It's a world where parroting even objective falsehood does not dent one's credibility. Look at Sudhir Chaudhary and Shweta Singh. They're still celebrated. The Prime Minister is still, well, the Prime Minister. Similarly, the BJP, which professes to be the party of national security, lets a hostile nation encroach on India's territory without much resistance and is still perceived as the party of national security. Yes, I'm talking about China. Since Modi's election in 2014, and more so after he demonetized the bulk of India's currency almost overnight in 2016, it has been almost fantastical to see his supporters hold and propagate with immense conviction views that are demonstrably false. A large population of the country, it seems, is living a reality that's not shared beyond them. For example, the international media did not corroborate the Indian government's account of the Balakot airstrikes. The way Operation Sindoor has been covered and chingoified in India is not how it has been covered internationally. Now you can say that they hate you, but the reality is that is also you choosing to live in a world of conspiratorial thinking. And anyone saying the truth is painted as Islamist by Modi supporters on social media and in the legacy media. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt said, in an ever-changing, incomprehensible world, that masses had reached the point where they would, at the same time, believe everything and nothing, think that everything was possible and that nothing was true. She wrote, mass propaganda discovered that its audience was ready at all times to believe the worst, no matter how absurd, and did not particularly object to being deceived because it held every statement to be a lie anyhow. One could make people believe the most fantastical statements one day and trust that if the next day they were given irrefutable proof of their falsehood, They would take refuge in cynicism instead of deserting the leaders who had lied to them. They would protest that they had known all along that the statement was a lie and would admire the leaders for their superior tactical cleverness. Also applies to someone like Trump. But Modi's genius lies not in deception, but in the performance of sincerity. He appears less as a prime minister than as the nation's self-appointed patriarch, with every televised address an epistle to his wayward children. The result is a citizenry that judges policies not on outcomes but on perceived intentions. When Chinese soldiers enter Indian territory and Indian soldiers die, Modi declares on national television that no such incursion had occurred. The nation, rather than being outraged by this contradiction, rallied to his defense. The border, like the truth, had become a matter of interpretation, and which leads us to manufacturing consent. I do not know what happened to the Rafale that flew around the Pakistani border during the recent Operation Sindhu. I do not know because I cannot claim to know the truth 100%. When I say I do not know the truth, I'm acknowledging the fact that the world has been so blurred with all different types of news floating in and around all of us that it is almost impossible to know. But it is also true that an attaché from the Indian Air Force claimed on an international television channel in Singapore that it happened. However, if you ask an average Indian Modi voter today, he or she would completely refute it. Similarly, in the past, when you remember the digital airstrike happened in response to the Chinese incursion into the Galwan Valley, it was very interesting because for the longest time, the government maintained that there had been no incursion. In fact, Modi ji said on national television that there was no incursion. This was duly used by the Chinese media that the Prime Minister of India is saying there is no incursion, then how could there be an incursion? Still, the government's only reaction had been to ban 59 Chinese apps available to Indian users. If Modi's supporters were to honestly assess this move, they would have to agree that at the foreign policy level, it is disproportionately small, if that. Instead, they are lauding it in the legacy media, on social media, and on the ground. To make sense of why this is so, we need to know that there are two ways of framing an argument: the winding diatribe and the thought-terminating cliché. A winding diatribe is when someone talks at length, sounds smart, and seems to know what they are talking about without making sense. Any speech of Modi can be an example of a winding diatribe. But let's analyze the one in which he called the lighting lamps to convey appreciation for Corona warriors. He said, "At that time, if you have turned off all the lights of your homes and each one of us in all directions has lit a diya, we will experience the superpower of light, clearly illuminating the common purpose we are all fighting for." This is a string of words, spoken in a grammatically acceptable fashion, and yet it doesn't really make any sense. Other experts in this mode of communication include Jaggi, Sri Sri, and Deepak Chopra. Meanwhile, a thought-dominating cliché is something that may not be true but feels true and permits you to not think about it any further. An example is the now legendary line, "Seema pe hamare jawan lad rahe hain," which you can use to end any debate. It's a thought-terminating cliché. It means that I have said something so axiomatic that the argument need not to continue. Both these ways of framing an argument, winding diatribe and thought-terminating cliché, rely on what's known as peripheral route processing. It means that instead of the content of what is said, how it is said gives validity to the idea that's being sold. For example, demonetization as policy could invite questions. But when it comes from the setting of the PM addressing the country, secondary factors, the intimidating nature of the office, the fact that it is said in an assured way, give the idea greater validity. This is why a celebrity endorsing a brand makes it more valuable to the consumer. Another form of peripheral route processing is called argumentum ab octurate, or argument from authority. We see this frequently on Indian TV. For instance, during COVID, Kapil Dev, an authority on cricket, or Ravina Tandon, a debatable authority on acting, is brought on to speak about the coronavirus pandemic. Or a TV talking head declares that India will defeat Pakistan and capture Islamabad, without losing any credibility when it does not happen. This then becomes a self-enforcing cycle where instead of arguing about the validity of a diatribe or thought-terminating cliché, people believe in it. To give you another very good example, there are two videos available on YouTube from Indian Parliament. On one hand, where Amit Shah is saying that he would give his life to get POK, and on the other hand, Rajnath Singh, the Indian defense minister, is saying that getting POK was never our aim. So if you're selling people on something that's fundamentally irrational, you rely heavily on peripheral route processing. Now, as soon as a modicum of agreement about the chain of events or information you're peddling is reached among the believers, the sheer number of those who agree with you and the structural power they have over the news media and other public platforms means any disagreement can be outstreamed. So this happens, we agree. But the question is, why does this happen? Why does that lady try? Why do we believe everything that Modi ji says? And the answer is, in this social system where the same truth comes to you from different sources, news media, social media, family WhatsApp groups, acceptance provides social currency and disagreement is treason. Here, the leader is constantly valorized as a messiah, and whoever disagrees is seen as disagreeing not with the leader of the government, but the idea of patriotism, nationhood, goodness, and what is right. This is why Sudhir and Arnav will keep saying what they are saying, and why Modi will keep winning unless something completely unforeseen happens. A large section of the Indian population has begun to show the tendencies of being in a cult. Let's compare the state of today's India with the signs usually observed in a cult. In his essay explaining fascism, Umberto Eco argues that it is not possible to organize these traits into a coherent system, but it is enough that one of them be present to allow fascism to coagulate around it. And I know I started with cult and moved to fascism, but you will see why I did that. Point 1 from Umberto Eco. The cult of tradition. It combines cultural syncretism with the rejection of modernism. I can go on, but Ayush with our healthcare system, talking random gibberish about Sanskrit being the oldest language or being used as a code language at NASA. These are all a way to reject modernism in favor of some sort of internal grouping together for our own tradition. The cult of action for action's sake. It dictates that action is of value in itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This is connected to anti-intellectualism and irrationalism and often manifests in attack on modern culture and science. Demonetization is an action for action's sake. Operation Sindoor is an action for action's sake, because the question is, what did it achieve? Will there be no more future terrorist events in India? No. So it was an action for action's sake. Yet this is not merely a failure of intellect or education. It is an emotional conquest. As Milan Kundera once wrote, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. But when memory itself is rendered suspect, when even the past becomes pliable to present needs, what is left to resist with? The government's monopoly is not just over facts, but over the national mood. Pride is pumped like oxygen. Dissent is treated like an autoimmune disorder. Which brings me to my third point. Disagreement is treason. Fascism devalues intellectual discourse and critical reasoning as barriers to action. Fear of difference, which fascism seeks to exploit and exacerbate, often in the form of racism or appeals against foreigners and immigrants. Look at what is happening in Gurgaon and Noida with the so-called Bangladeshis living there. Appeal to a frustrated middle class, which fears economic pressure from the demands and aspirations of lower social groups. Obsession with the plot and hyping up of an enemy threat. This often involves an appeal to xenophobia, such as Germany's elite's fear of the 1930s Jewish populist prosperity, for example. The targeted minority is demonized by identifying it as an internal security threat. Think about the constant reminder that Muslim population is increasing faster than the Hindu population in India. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy because life is permanent warfare. There must always be an enemy to fight. Both Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini worked first to organize and clean up their respective countries and then build the war machines that they intended to and did use. Despite Germany being prohibited by the Versailles Treaty from building a military force, this principle leads to a fundamental contradiction within fascism, the incompatibility of ultimate triumph without perpetual war. Contempt for the weak. Although a fascist society is elitist, everybody in the society is educated to become a hero. For example, the 1930s Germany, especially Hitler, labeled the Jews as physically and mentally as well as the physically and mentally disabled Germans as weak. Because they were weak, they had to be exterminated. News speak, employing and promoting an impoverished vocabulary to limit critical reasoning and distorting the meaning of words, like how secularism has been distorted in India. Spread of propaganda, lies, untruths, nanochip in the currency notes, claims about the wonders of demonetization or Chinese incursions. In such a society, facts and figures don't mean much when the fundamental truth around them can be disputed. In India, this system was created when religion came to be associated with the party, then religion with the nation, ergo the party with the nation. National security and national integrity. Truth was distorted to suit the party. Truth was also distorted by changing history books, for one to suit the sentiments of the majority community. Now the people with social capital, that is, the upper caste Hindus to be specific, identify with the party emotionally. The readership of blind newspapers and the rating of toxic news channels speak to this, but also the crying videos of the diaspora show you that. One must resist the comfort of despair. Not all who support Modi do so out of malice or ignorance. Many do so because in a brutal, uncertain world, his promises feel reassuring. He does not offer policies, he offers purpose. Not outcomes, but identity. He speaks not to the rational self, but to the wounded one. And unless we find ways to speak to that same self, to offer not just critique, but consolation, not just facts, but fraternity, we will lose this battle not just for the truth, but for imagination. What then is to be done? When emotions outweigh evidence, when numbers are truer than narratives, and when the very language of disagreement is treasonous. Can a democracy survive when persuasion becomes propaganda and belief immunizes itself against reality? Perhaps we are condemned to be the priest, the woodcutter, and the commoner of Rashomon, sharing our fractured versions of truth under the collapsing archways of public discourse, wondering not just what happened, but whether it matters who is still willing to care. For the party has taken control of the emotional levers of the people. There is not a rational argument or fact that can beat emotion. Emotional choices need emotional responses to change minds. And until we can fashion such emotional responses, we are perhaps condemned to having our thoughts drowned out in the cacophony of newspeak.